and I recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Liccardo, who is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman, thank you for your testimony today, and thank you to the chair. I represent a good part of Silicon Valley, and I know you're very familiar with the importance of capital markets there, both public and private. And certainly there are great concerns, and I appreciate you are addressing some of those concerns about the challenges, particularly for early stage companies to be able to go public. And certainly I've been working with colleagues on the other side of the aisle as well, and for example, extending the ramp for emerging growth companies. And I appreciate there are other things you've mentioned in your testimony, particularly about tying materiality more tightly to disclosures and other things that might reduce some of the burdens of going public. I wanted to shift, though, to the other part of that, the phenomenon that we're seeing, which is this massive shift, at least in the percentage of total investment from public markets to private markets, and the massive growth we've seen in private equity in particular, and now increasingly exposing retail investors to private equity and secondary markets. And I know there are many folks in Silicon Valley who themselves are quite sophisticated. They might be, at Kleiner Perkins, for example, but are very concerned about the transparency and, frankly, investor protection as we're starting to widen access to private equity. Is there anything that the SEC is considering or might consider to improve transparency and protect investors who are increasingly getting into those secondary markets?
Well, thank you. Well, it's a very important issue, and I take it very seriously that, as we deliberate over, how to allow, more access to the private markets, which have their own kind of special, qualities and whatnot that are hugely different than the public markets. We need to do this deliberatively with good guardrails. And so we, the Department of Labor and Treasury, are very much focused on, that aspect of investor protection. But as I mentioned earlier in the hearing here, that it is because of the way the public markets have developed and how we have half the number of public companies as we had 30 years ago. We are now, the United States is fully 50% of the world's capitalization, equity capitalization. So everything is spread among fewer companies, obviously, but we have really strong, robust private markets as well. But there are a lot of, buyer beware issues there in the private markets where, that we need to make sure that we're not just, opening up, retail investors to something that they're not necessarily ready for or aware of all the pitfalls. So a lot has to rest on the trustees and the other, people who are managing 401k funds. So we have to really make sure that they are aware and that we set up parameters around which they may put their beneficiaries' money into markets that are not public.
I appreciate that. As we're thinking about that significant shift from public to private, should we be concerned in Congress? Are there particular actions we should be taking to try to redirect that percentage in some way to encourage more of those capital dollars in the more transparent public markets?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I leave that to you, but ERISA is a very strong tool, actually, and so that's why the Department of Labor is central to this, and I know they take that very seriously and the standards under which trustees, are bound, and so I think that's, that itself is a good tool that we have to try to then, put in the proper guardrails.
Thank you. I yield.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Muser, who is also the chair of the subcommittee on oversight